Welcome to the 93rd episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to review our rivalry win over North Texas. Let's get started. Before we get into the game, can we just talk about how crazy it is that the score on Friday night, 48-27, was the exact score that we had 2 years ago when we played North Texas in the championship for Conference USA on a Friday night in the Dome? That's got to mean something, right?
UNT never had a chance, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I guess not.
I mean, look, this puts us at now a four-game winning streak in the series. It's the longest winning streak between the two schools. Obviously, a good thing. Let's see if we can continue to extend this win streak for at least a few more seasons. Let's hope we can just
continue to dominate. Yeah, definitely. In our prediction, we both thought this was going to be a really close game. You had said you thought it was going to be 48-45. I said 35-31.
Right.
While it did get close at the end, the final score really wasn't close at all.
No.
You also said that North Texas was going to have some passing success. But I believe UTSA, and you said, but I believe UTSA will have more overall success in the three facets of the game, which all turned out to be true.
Coincidental. I mean, it's nice to be right. But, I mean, also, I think both of us watch a lot of college football. We watch a lot of AAC football.
Yeah.
And, look, just don't ask me about my college pick'em because that league, I went from being number one in there so I'm in a month-long slide now, and I've just gone down the rankings. I think I'm like number 14 out of 44 now. So it's been a tough road for the Toves there, but we'll see if I can bring it back up. But you don't know what's going to happen from week to week. You have to watch games. You kind of see if you can figure out what are the tendencies of some of these teams and what are they going to do when they play UTSA in particular.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, I question Eric Morris as a head coach for UNT in our preview, and they end up losing, as you said, 48-27 to UTSA. To me, the big issues with the Leach disciples is that, as I said, they're fun to watch, and they'll create offensive systems that will make lesser talented teams competitive. But what they fail to do is to kind of bring together a complementary football team.
Right.
And I just don't understand why they haven't, it hasn't hit them. Like, Eric Morris is beholden to his system. Even in the UNT notes, he's said to be an offensive mastermind, which I can question and certainly will question. But Atos, is North Texas really learning the tough lesson that they're better off without, as a UNT fan called him, Coach Keebler, a.k.a. Eric Morris?
Yeah, I find it hard to believe that they really traded up from Seth Littrell. Like, I feel like Seth Littrell was an okay coach, and I feel like Eric Morris is an okay coach. And I just don't see how he is going to elevate the program if that's really what the intent was. You know, they felt like Seth Littrell couldn't take him to the next level. I just don't know that Eric Morris is going to be able to do that if he continues to believe that he can just out offense, these other teams, and he doesn't really make a good decision on the defensive side.
Well, speaking of decision on the defensive side, they did fire defensive coordinator Matt Capone after the game.
They did.
Which was on Saturday. The defense was allowing 458 yards per game and 35.7 points per game. Complementary football would have helped them there, and It would have helped Matt Capone. Now, it doesn't help the scheme, but in my opinion, it doesn't matter who Eric Morris is going to hire at defensive coordinator until Morris learns how to play complementary football, as I've been now trying to bang through everybody's head into this very start of this podcast. They're just not going to be very good, which sucks for the AAC because, yes, you're going to have this North Texas team that might be fun to watch, and Eric Morris is going to sit back on his little throne saying, I'm an offensive mastermind, when he really isn't. Like, they're just –
yeah,
it's not going to be a team that anybody's really going to take seriously, and you can't take these guys seriously anymore without that ability to play defense.
Right.
And if they can't play defense and good defense and, offense that matches – they're going to do things like giving up a new program record for UTSA, 681 yards of total offense, 379 through the air, 302 on the ground. A season high 302 rushing yards is what I really want to talk about here. First time since Western Kentucky game in 2021. Atos. I think we'll explain some of this 300 yards, but it was good to see this UTSA team at least have learned a lesson. And one of the things I called out that I hope that Jeff Traylor and, Justin Burke had figured out what to do on the ground.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, two things there. Like, you have to understand when you're trying to play an air raid offense that's really tough on the defensive side, because you're scoring within a very short period of time and your defense is left to, be on the field for long periods of time. So it's always going to be a challenge. And I think to your point, Eric Morris is going to have to not only find a different defensive coordinator, but he's going to have to find a different scheme because whoever he hires is going to have the exact same, issue.
Right.
Fortunately, UTSA was able to take advantage of that. And, it's ironic that you talk about the most yards that we had on the ground since Western Kentucky, another air raid team, right? That's just an issue with that style of offense. But, it was interesting kind of listening to some of the comments that were made in the post-game presser because, after a win, especially after a win over a rival, it's really easy to just focus on all of the good. And there was a lot of good out of this game.
Yeah, there was.
I mean, if you look at the offense, we're continuing to see the growth of Owen. We're going to talk more about that in the future. We'll talk about the impact of having David Amador back, the tight ends really stepping up over these last couple of games. On the special team side, it's the consistency of Tate and his kicking that has really made a difference these last couple of games.
Right.
Defensively, we've seen at home consistency on the D-line, the linebackers, Zay Frazier in particular, really playing well when he's healthy. But you can't be deceived by all of those great numbers. Everything has not been fixed at this point. And when you listen to Jeff Traylor in his post-game, it just kind of concerned me a little bit that it seemed like he was like, oh, look, 2 games in a row. We're back to talking about bowl eligibility, done, everything's good, But it's not all magically fixed. We talk about, okay, these things are good now. Well, you can't just leave it at good because good is the enemy of great. And we don't want to just be good, right? I mean, we still have to focus on the fact that we were playing a really bad defense in North Texas. So bad, in fact, that they fired the defensive coordinator after the game, right? We still have issues with our offensive line. We saw more injuries in the game, even on during the game on the offensive line. So while winning kind of hides and masks some of that, it doesn't cure everything.
Well, it goes back to something we had talked about a few pods ago where we said, hey, Greg Luca brought up a good point. Hey, at one point he said, everybody kept shushing me when I was bringing up some of these issues when the team was winning the last few seasons. Like, hey, we're winning. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's weird that we're doing the same thing again, but we only got into 5-5. Let's not celebrate too much. We're at 5-5. We're 500 for the year. You can't forget everything that happened.
And we still have to win one of the next 2 games to get to bowl eligibility,
which we will. But the thing is that this is not where we thought we were going to be. No. We knew that it was going to be a journey. We just didn't think that we would shoot ourselves in the foot so many times. And to be honest with you, yes, there's a lot of things that you can say that make this story up for the 2024 season. But these are some things right now that we're going to talk about that we believe still need to be really focused on. Our inability to score touchdowns in the middle 8, Tobes. You've mentioned it a few times during this season. I don't know what you caught on to, but at some point the last couple of seasons, you've really been bugged about the middle 8.
Well, yeah. I mean, you see those last couple of minutes right before halftime and then coming out of halftime. In a lot of cases, we're excited because we've deferred the ball at the beginning. It's either we have a big lead and we're getting the ball back after halftime, or it's a close game and we're getting the ball back after halftime. But yet we struggle to score at that point, either before or after halftime. And frankly, all of the third quarter. And that really seems to be the point where we let these other teams get back in the game, or we let them build a lead. And then it's like we've dug ourselves a hole that we can't get out of. And even in this game against North Texas, what happened? We started getting to field goals right at the end of the half, right at the beginning of the next half. And then the next thing you know, North Texas finally, figures out what they can do with the passing game and how they can expose our defense. And they score touchdowns. And then you look up at the screen and that 27-7 score has now changed to 33-27. And you're starting to have the PTSD Tulsa flashbacks, like, oh my God, what just happened here? So, I mean, that's a situation that we've got to fix, because even in this game, even when we were winning, this was an issue.
Well, here's why you're bringing this up too, because I went back and looked just for you. UTSA has been outscored 89-44 in the third quarter throughout this season. They've been outscored 81-80 in the fourth quarter throughout the season.
Right.
Now, the last two games against Memphis and now against North Texas have skewed those numbers to make it look better. It wasn't looking as good as those numbers are. And those numbers aren't very good.
Those numbers don't look good, yeah.
So so our 2-game win streak here against Memphis and North Texas, it's still 13-13 in the third quarter and 28-19 in the fourth quarter. Actually, we're outscored Memphis and North Texas 28-19 in the fourth quarter. So it still hasn't skewed that much better, but at least you get the picture that is a problem. You're right. Like, what is it about coming out of halftime? Because it seems like we either really have a lot of momentum in that first half and we don't have in the second half. But here, this is why I really want to bring it up, because you've always talked about, hey, we're a second half team, and people have told you that. And then you had a thing a few podcast episodes ago when you were saying, no, we're not. We're not a second half team.
Not anymore.
No.
We used to be a second half team. We used to come out of halftime with adjustments. But this year, it's just been a struggle where we've come out of halftime sluggish, like that Tulsa game where I made the comment, I took a nap at halftime, and I think our team did too, because we struggled so much right after it. But I don't know. It's definitely something that's got to be addressed. The other thing is just the penalties and the undisciplined play.
Right.
I mean, we continue to talk about that. 8 accepted penalties in this game, but we committed 12. 12 penalties. The only reason the number's 8 is because Eric Morris declined 4 of them. But when you think about it in terms of how many penalties we committed, that's, again, we're trending to be one of the highest penalized teams in the nation, and that's not the place where we want to lead the nation. Right,
and then you're wondering, why are we 500? Well, penalties. There's other problems, obviously, but look, there was an unsportsmanlike on Danye Taylor again. Wasn't needed. Like, it
was unnecessary.
It just completely unnecessary. And then there should have been another one on Robert Henry, because he was caught on camera flipping off the North Texas bench. These are the moments where you're supposed to show that level of maturity so that you can continue building good habits. That's what they say about their culture. Yeah. They talk about, we stack good days on good days. You should be stacking good plays on good plays too. And that's not stacking those plays, right? And that's not what's happening.
Because these things then become issues when we're on the road.
Right.
And they have been issues in those games that we lost.
Correct.
So you got to fix them when you're winning, because when you're losing and things go bad and we're starting to get frustrated, then these penalties really can become a negative impact to the score, to the outcome of the game.
Right. And look, you had talked about earlier about the offensive line and how they kind of, had still had issues. Well, had 3 illegal formation penalties.
Yeah.
All of them were declined. But to your point, as always, poor execution, right? And then there were moments, and I was like, I think I'm seeing this, but nah, I'm not. But there was plenty of passes where our offensive linemen had drifted upfield and were blocking downfield. That's ineligible receivers downfield. We didn't get flagged for those. But I mean, it's just those little things that, as you have just said, that if you're not working to correct them, that's what kills you in road games. That's how things turn. And these are these little things. And I get it. We're being a little negative, but this is where you need to create those habits, as I already said. Like, this is when you need to make sure that you solidify
Yeah.
yourself.
And that's where, again, I feel like Trailer at times like kind of goes from one pendulum to the other. It's like you've got to take the wins, you got to celebrate all the good things, but you still have to fix these things when you're winning so that they don't become issues when you're losing.
Right.
And those are the things that just kind of concern me. The other thing that I thought was interesting that we talked about in the post game was the team being resilient. And I think that's absolutely the case. This is a resilient team. We could have seen a really detrimental slide after that Tulsa game. Or we could have seen it at any point, and it could have just continued to spiral.
That's a better point.
And, he talked about how happy he was for these kids and how they've held themselves together in spite. They've had some, really tough fourth quarter leads that they've blown. And I get all that, and I think it's great. I think the narrative for the season, it's going to be interesting to kind of look back at it, because the thing that's frustrating right now for fans is we see how they're performing against Memphis and North Texas, and we think, what is it that went wrong? Like, why can't we do this on the road? And are we going to be able to do this, play the same way that we play today in the Dome when we go to play Army or when we go to a bowl game, if we get that bowl berth,
Well, even to that, we've also questioned home games, right? Like, it's almost week to week, which, I was trying to think back, and I was like, I never really felt like this over the last few seasons. And it always felt like there was always like momentum moving forward.
Yeah.
Here are the problems. And yes, as you eloquently said before, let's celebrate some of those wins, because I think we've outlined all the negative stuff. Now it's time to outline a lot of the positive stuff. So let's start out like we always do with some special teams discussion.
Yeah, I thought this was probably one of our best games on special teams.
Absolutely. I mean, I would definitely say, with no penalties like we had seen that had been a trend before, we've cleaned those up. I thought everything was pretty clean outside of one play, which we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah, we got our first onside kick recovery since the U8B game in 2022, which seems kind of incredible that it's been that long.
It seems like yesterday, right? But your boy, Tate Sandell, once again, I mean, look, it did go to the North Texas player, but I mean, it's meant to get close to the opposing player. And then, obviously UTSA was able to make a play on it. So Good kick from Tate there.
Yeah, and continuing on the path of Tate, he had 4 field goals in the game, which tied the record for the most field goals in a single game for UTSA with Sean Iano,
who was present at the game, because he was had sworn in some new military members at the beginning, right before the game. So that was really cool.
I think one of the things that you picked up on was sort of an underrated moment for Cale Hogan.
Yeah, first of all, Cale had a pretty good night punting. Most of them were short punts. They had to be, essentially inside the 20-yard line. I thought he did a very good job of getting those punts in there. But there was a high snap on the third field goal, and it wasn't until we rewatched it till we realized just how high it was, I should say. And it was just a really good job of him pulling that ball down and getting it down for Tate to kick. Something that I think that they probably wouldn't have been able to do that earlier in the season.
Sure.
And it's something that I kind of talked to you away from the pod about, because it felt like, Jeff Traylor kept trying to rationalize what the issue was for the special teams early in the season. And it really came down to the fact that we figured out later Chase Allen's just having a tough time kicking field goals. Got the yips or whatever. I never felt like Cale Hogan or the operation was really a problem, but this happens early in the season. This could have been a problem, right?
Sure.
So still a good thing that happens on the special teams. And like I said, overall, just really good play from that side of the ball. Now let's get to the offensive side of the ball. We'll first start out with the keys to victory. Yeah, I said, hey, dominate the time of possession. Right. And it's not because I really wanted them to emulate Army. It's just you keep North Texas offense on the sidelines, and you're going to have a much better chance of winning the game, because that means that they're going to have problems and going to start trying to press when they get onto the field. Mm-hmm. UTSA ends up dominating time of possession, 39 minutes, 16 seconds to UNT's 20 minutes, 44 seconds. At halftime, it was 21 minutes and 18 seconds for UTSA and 8 minutes and 42 seconds for North Texas.
Yeah.
So safe to say that, it's clear either Justin Burke or Jeff Traylor is listening to our podcast.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure they're
I'm sure they're thrilled by the way we talk about.
I know, and he probably feels like I'm picking on him from, kind of talking about some of the things he still needs to fix. But to be fair, Coach Traylor, it's because I want you to continue to elevate this program, because I don't want to have a conversation like we just had about Seth Luttrell and Eric Morris. Like,
Right.
they're both, fine.
Yeah, exactly. All kidding aside, the other key to victory was timely runs for Owen. And I wouldn't say we saw that much in the first half, but we did see it a lot in the second half.
Right.
At crucial moments, too. Owen ends up 10 rushes for 88 yards, his longest being 42 yards there in the second half, which really you could tell was finally starting to break the back of that North Texas defense.
Right, absolutely.
As if they weren't having problems enough before. Now all of a sudden we see Owen running down the field like, a few times, much like Frank did. So, but I think you want to talk about somebody else that was key in this offensive explosion that we had.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could probably make a case for Owen being the MVP of the offense, but you certainly could also make a case for David Amador. He comes in, it's his second game back this season. He has a career high 122 yards in receptions, a toe tap catch that makes, top 5. I don't remember if it was Sports Center or
Sports Center.
Yeah, just a fabulous catch where he really demonstrated just some amazing body awareness. He gets flipped in the air over 2 defenders, continues to hold on to a pass, even though they basically like flip him over and kind of body slam him on the ground. And then later on, we see him in a trick play where he throws a double pass. I mean, listen, if he punts the ball at some point, then I think we can really call him like the Swiss Army knife, aka Brendan Brady. But I feel like the one thing that Brendan has done that David Amador hasn't is, punt. So we just need to see a punt, and then we'll just know at that point that we definitely have another Swiss Army knife.
All right, something else here for Coach Traylor to probably consider in his high school recruitment. Atoves likes herself an offensive Swiss Army knife.
Because... I know. I mean, there were just those moments with Brendan Brady where you're like, okay, well, what can he do?
He's gonna be selling beer on the in the Alamo Dome. It's like, don't worry about it. I'll get back in time for the offense. Like, you're right. Like, it's a man of many skills, and
right.
David Amador certainly is. After I just talked about Frank Harris and Owen McCown here, now we're talking about Brendan Brady and David Amador. So it's good to see these guys that have many skills and how UTSA is utilizing all these skills. All right, I gave Robert Henry a hard time about the middle finger on camera. And look, I'm not saying at all that maybe North Texas didn't deserve it, but that's besides the point.
Right.
Like that would have been a penalty. So anyway, he actually rushed for a career high 168 yards. He had the career long touchdown of 83 that was coming straight into the touchdown club. We'll get into a story about that right now, because he actually came straight at us as we just happened to position ourselves really well in the touchdown club. And hey, look, I put up my birds up with the foam birds up. And that's when he just kind of, when you see him on the replays and he kind of starts like shushing or kind of silent, telling the crowd like, I got this, calm down, everybody. I was like, I'm celebrating you, man. Like, you've had a tough year rushing the ball. This was great. I want to celebrate you because
and stupid ESPN2 did not just pan up slightly so that we could be on television. They caught another moment. We'll talk about that when we get to the defense, but that would have been a nice little fun moment. We're like, oh, we probably will be on TV, but no, you just see Robert Henry and just the very bottom of our friend's hands. So yeah.
Look, they couldn't handle all that birds up in their face. And
That's
look,
right.
I get it. But anyway, I think Robert Henry, I thought throughout the evening, he was doing a very good job of rushing the ball. I thought he was getting some and making some lanes for himself to run in. And it wasn't like he was getting the type of lanes that we'll talk about that Shane Porter did for North Texas. But what Robert Henry did do was make sure to keep moving the chains and had that sort of sincere McCormick feel to him, where Sincere just always seemed like he was that workhorse back that always just seemed to fall forward when
Hmm.
he was rushing the ball. Even when he got hit behind the line of scrimmage, it just seemed like Sincere would find a way to get a 1 or 2 yard gain out of it, even though it probably should have been like a 2 or 3 yard loss, right? And like that's just how Sincere ran, and it felt that Robert Henry kind of evoked some of that rushing prowess here.
Right.
So, sort of a callback to all of our past, some of our past, I should say, UTSA players. Benito's, I said it before, are we tight end university?
Yeah, I mean, another phenomenal game for our tight ends. Patrick Overmeyer, Dan Dishman, Houston Thomas. I mean, they all had big catches, 13 targets. They had 11 catches, 106 yards. Dan Dishman got a touchdown. I mean, just great play by them. And they have over and over shown that they are consistent, reliable receivers for Owen.
Justin Burke getting them to go downfield and not having to always stay in and block has been really, I think, the big change in this offense. And, we kind of called it out before, but just seeing us utilize our tight ends as much as we have. And, at some point it was because of the wide receiver injuries, but these are sure-handed tight ends. And that's why I want to make sure that you did call out the 13 targets, because we have had wide receiver drops, but these tight ends just will not let go of that ball. Like they just seem to make the catch. And, obviously we want to continue seeing this down the line, but whatever, like, I guess what I'm tongue tied here is that Owen McCown just seems to have this knack, whether it's David Amador or whether it's his tight ends, to just not flinch. Like whoever's in, you better be paying attention, because there's a good chance that Owen's going to throw it to you. And he does not, as we said before, he loves to spread the ball around. Right. And because of it, I think we're seeing how these tight ends blossom too. I mean, it's I think a two-way street there, where obviously Owen's playing well, and obviously you also have these tight ends that are getting open. And it's just different, I think, seeing from all the tight ends that we've seen before that seem to be more towards the blocking end, and now you're getting to see much more of the receiving end for them.
Right.
So our boy Justin Burke was really pulling out the trick plays on Friday night.
Yeah, I mean, direct snap to Robert Henry and then hands off to McCown. Not something that you would expect to see, and I'm sure that probably threw off North Texas. How many times do you really see a handoff to the quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And then, fortunately, he throws that pass to McCoy, and McCoy was right on it. And then the double pass we mentioned earlier from Amador to McCown. Again, I think if the other team knows Amador's background, they're probably going to be more likely to suspect that type of play, just because David Amador did play quarterback in high school. But, that play to Robert Henry, I think it caught pretty much everybody off guard, even UTSA fans that were watching the game.
Well, for me, I was like, hey, why is William McCoy so wide open? And then I was like, oh, here comes the ball. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, I really couldn't see, but it finally hit me. Oh, that's why he's wide open, because North Texas just got fooled. So, yeah, obviously, I need to continue to mature in my viewing. But
we were also in the touchdown club at that point. Well, sure. It was a little bit harder to see.
Sure. I think what we really should also kind of talk about briefly is Owen McCown.
Absolutely.
We've seen the maturation, we've seen the growth. We keep talking about it from week to week, but it really, to me, has been shocking to see, again, how I mentioned before, just him not flinching when it comes to who's on the field to catch the ball. He just doesn't seem to. He doesn't seem to flinch at adversity.
Right.
And that's something that he had kind of talked about in the beginning of the year, where he had begun learning from him, Frank Harris, last year, was the fact that Frank just had this kind of aura about him that he always made sure to let the offense know, hey, we're going to get this. No matter what, whatever the situation is, we're going to succeed. And Owen, I think, is really starting to enter that territory. Like, as much as I get this is a bad defense, but you still have to understand some of the, I would say, the steps that are moving, that he's growing in. And it really feels good to see him kind of enter that sort of where he went from the beginning of the season, where it felt like if they were saddled with some big sack or something, or like, a tackle for loss that set them behind the chains, like a 1st and 20 or something. Now it really does feel like Owen's got the command and the respect of his offensive playmakers to just say, all right, 1st and 20, it just means we got an extra 10 yards to go. Let's go. Let's do this.
Yeah, he's definitely come into his own. I think, this is the bright spot of the offense, and it's nice to know that, has said publicly, Traylor said publicly, he's committed to staying at UTSA. So it's going to be, really great for them to be able to build around Owen over the next 2 years.
Right. And the fact that you have now a solidified quarterback where you don't have to wait like we had before, where we kind of had these gaps between what I would kind of say pro-wise, the franchise quarterback, and the handoff from Frank Harris to Owen McCown puts UTSA in a position where they don't have to be looking for a quarterback.
Right.
And to your point, all they have to do is just make sure they put the right pieces around him. We're going to have to look at that offensive line, obviously, in recruitment, try to figure out whether it's coaching, whether it's players, whatever it is. But you put some protection around Owen, man, it looks like he's really going to take off this in the next 2 seasons. So
yeah, and we've talked a lot about comparing Owen to, Frank Harris in 2020 and trying to give him some grace, right, as he's kind of settled in. Well, now looking at where Owen is in terms of passing yards for the season, he is 3rd in the record books right now behind peak Frank Harris seasons 2022 and 2021. And one thing to keep in mind with those 2 seasons is that we had 14 games because we had a bowl and the conference championship. So unlikely that in this season or in just in a normal scenario, we would be able to, break into the top 2. But the fact that he's already at number 3 and he's passed up Eric Sosa from 2013, I think is something to just really be impressed by for his first full season as quarterback.
Obviously, exciting times to go. So let's get to the defense. Key to victory there was timely blitzes on Chandler Morris to create turnovers and get defensive stops. The few times that UTSA did pressure Morris, we forced 2 interceptions. And overall, really just stopped North Texas offense from scoring on 9 of their 13 drives. To me, our concern was the secondary, and I felt like the secondary played really well. Against Memphis, you kind of worried because you had like some really good wide receivers. Against North Texas, it's not about how talented their wide receivers are. It's more about how they get them into space. And now you're asking your cornerbacks and safeties to really make some big plays. And to be honest with you, like I said, the reason I feel the secondary really played well is because you have cornerback, and you mentioned it, Zay Frazier, who 2 interceptions and really seemed to shut down whoever he was guarding on defense.
Yeah, it was just a really great time to have him back. After the Memphis game, I think we were all a little bit nervous about, how healthy he would be. But, he came back and played the game of his life. And, now I think he's one of the only players we've had in history who's had 2 interceptions in a single game more than one time. So, I just very excited to see what he continues to do in these next couple of games. But I think overall, they just did a really great job in shutting down DT Sheffield. We were really worried about him and what he might be able to do. And it's pretty much a non-factor.
Yeah, absolutely. He really was a non-factor. 3 receptions for 13 yards, and then he had 1 carry for 2 yards. This is where you have to give a lot of credit to the secondary. Jamarius Lewis, our safety, also played really well. I thought he had some really good moments in breaking up passes, but just as a whole, the team played well. And to shut down this potent North Texas offense does say something. Obviously, there are some things to consider here. I still wonder if the injury that Chandler Morris suffered in the Tulane game, whether it's truly healed, because he doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
There were some passes that just did not, I don't know. It just seemed like the angle that he was thrown at times, it looked like me because, I have at times a bad shoulder.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I compensate by throwing at a weird angle. So I kind of saw it from him, and maybe that's what it is. And maybe that limited their offensive production, but that's where you have to make choices. And, that's not UTSA's fault. Like, everybody's hurt. So you can't make that, to me, that injury storyline for North Texas without saying, well, UTSA's suffering the same thing. Look at our depleted secondary. We don't
Right.
have Ken Robinson. There are guys that are missing throughout this team. So the fact that we were able to blanket the wide receivers was terrific. The fact that we were able to take advantage of maybe Chandler Morris's injuries, just as good. Overall, this defense allows 480 yards, 241 through the air. They did allow 25 rushes for 239 yards. But the problem is here, and if you're just reading the stat box or just watching the game, you're going to see those big plays. But be careful, because this UTSA defense was geared towards stopping the pass, which they did effectively, and we already covered. It's just that when you're trying, you can't do both effectively. And if you do, it's even a more stellar job. But this it was tough.
Typically, North Texas is, they're an air raid, right? So they don't really run the ball very much. So you have to defend them by, trying to stop the pass.
Right.
So again, because you're expecting these explosive throws, then when you get those explosive runs, it catches you off guard. And that's exactly what we saw with Sean Porter. All of a sudden, here's this fifth string running back,
a converted wide receiver.
Yeah, that all of a sudden busts out of nowhere and has these, this long 79-yard run, ends up with 3 touchdowns. He just had a really great night. But like you said, if you tried to then change and stop the run, you were going to give up these big passes. And I think overall, Jesslep, I'm sure, was just more concerned about giving up the big passes, because that's going to allow them to score so much quicker and get back into the game versus, trying to adjust for the run.
It would be second nature to do that, right? Like, this isn't working, or we've given up these big plays, so let's change our focus. So you're right. Like, Jesslep could have done that, but I'm glad that they didn't do the knee jerk.
Fun note, though, on Sean Porter, on his second touchdown, we mentioned earlier that we were a little disappointed that we didn't get on ESPN for the Robert Henry celebration. We did get on television when Sean Porter scored his second touchdown, because he runs towards, the touchdown club, and you can see all of us at one point, but in particular, Toves and our friend Christy, who have their foam hands in the, kind of bent so that they're basically giving him the thumb down and booing him. So that's just a fun little moment if you want to go back and look at it. Would have appreciated really the TV moment being the celebration of Robert Henry, not the booing of Sean Porter, but you get what you get.
It's a great moment in this household for me to be there.
That's right.
Booing a college guy. You do what you got to do, right? Fan how you want to fan. That's how I decided to fan right at that moment with
right.
Christy. Obviously, we were prepared to do what we needed to do to make sure that North Texas stayed out of the end zone.
Exactly.
But one last thing I really wanted to cover with this defense, because this defensive performance was really good. And really, to me, it was just collective. But you had talked about Eric Morris before, about some of his aggressiveness. And, you'd mentioned how he really wanted to stay on this front foot when it came to his offense. And, he really did go for it on fourth downs.
Yeah, and it was actually interesting, because when we got to the game, one of the first things our friend Robert said to us was, yeah, I hear that Eric Morris is really aggressive on fourth downs. I said, yeah, but what does he have to show for it? Like, he goes for it, but he doesn't make it. And that's exactly what happened in the game.
Right. 2 for 11 on third downs, which is 18% conversion, and 1 for 5 on fourth down, thanks to this UTSA defense. I mean, this UTSA defense really played well. And we're not talking about, like, say, 4th and 8 or 4th and, 12. We're talking about there was some 4th and 1 situations, and UTSA took care of business. Again, a collective effort. I mean, obviously, you can call out the defensive line. They didn't really have as much of an impact because of the fact that this is a pass-heavy, offense. The linebackers, though, were clutch. Like, I saw Jamal Ligon just flying around.
Yeah.
You saw Martavius French also flying around. I mean, they were just making plays. But again, collectively as a group, they played well together. And look, I had said before, it's going to cause Chandler Morris and also Eric Morris to press a little. And you said, well, what does he have to show for it? Well, you're right, because what Eric Morris does by going for 4th and 4th down, you put your defense in bad situations.
Right.
And I mean, North Texas looked flat from the start, and they just never seemed to really get into anything. And it's been like that now for a few games. They played some good teams, and now look what's happened. And this UTSA defense, while it has been maligned by us and others throughout the year, for this game, really played very well.
All right, let's move into the game that we're going to have on Friday. So the game against Temple will be Senior Day. So one of the things that should be coming out this week is who will be participating in Senior Day. This is one of the last years where you're going to have some kids with an extra COVID year. So even though we have someone participate in Senior Day, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be leaving. 2025, I think, is going to be the last time that we'll have that COVID year eligibility. So we're getting pretty close to that.
Yeah, and it'll get interesting, especially with UTSA, because you mentioned, the seniors. There are some players that have graduated, and so you kind of start wondering, like, what are their thoughts? Are they going to try to move on to the NFL? Or are they going to try to move on to the UFL? What is it that they're going to look forward to as their next step, especially if they want to keep playing? Like, some of these guys really do want to keep playing, and you that's the question that they need to answer.
Well, and you can't just look at the roster too and see like, oh, it's a senior, so they might be participating in Senior Day. You could have redshirt juniors who have graduated who might be participating as well, like Zay Frazier at the end of his post-game conference kind of alluded to the fact that he was considering himself a senior, even though the roster says he's a redshirt junior. So it'll be interesting to see who participates, but I think that'll kind of be a signal for, what we're going to see as some of the changes for the next year.
Right.
And talking about Temple specifically, UTSA leads the series 1-0. Last year we won 49-34 in Philadelphia. Temple is 3-7 overall, 2-4 in conference. We thought going into this preview that we were going to be talking about Stan Drayton being on the hot seat.
Right.
And we weren't wrong because he was fired. So, had a record of 3-9 in his first 2 seasons, only won 3 games to this point. Clearly, this was not the coach that Temple wanted to keep long term.
Right. And when you were actually doing the preview material for this, you had noted this interview with before the FAU game that he had this kind of weird sound to him, and I feel like you should tell us a little more about it because this was interesting.
This was really the reason why I felt like, okay, he's definitely on the hot seat, because they were interviewing him and talking about the previous game and kind of getting into, transitioning into planning for FAU, but he kept talking about player accountability. And he made this comment that the coaches can only do so much and the players have to take accountability for themselves because they can't be out there every single snap with the players. And generally, when you hear that kind of language, that's a coach that's about to get fired because that coach is out of ideas. They're not taking accountability and responsibility. Now they're saying, like, I've done everything I can. We got to get these kids to do more. And then he started kind of talking about how they were behind in conference and NIL and they didn't have enough money. And everything kind of gave you that impression of, okay, this is a guy who is out of ideas, is frustrated, is on his way out. And then sure enough, he ends up getting fired after an FAU win. Or after they beat FAU in overtime, which is kind of odd that they chose that moment, but nonetheless, it seems like it's probably the right thing to do, and the writing was on the wall.
Send him out a winner, right? But it's interesting because as you were talking through that, it always felt like anytime I saw Stan Drayton at the mic, talking to reporters, he always had this bad, like, body language. Like, it always felt like, it's almost like he didn't really want to be a head coach.
Right.
Like, he did, but he didn't. And to your point, it did feel like he had run out of a lot of ideas. And with that, he's replaced by defensive coordinator Everett Withers. You should remember that name if you've been a UTSA fan.
Yep.
He was a former Texas State coach during the Frank Wilson era. He's 0-2 versus UTSA, obviously because our one loss to Texas State was this year. And he lost 44-14 in San Marcos in 2017 and 25-21 in the Dome in 2018. Based on what we've seen before, with the AAC head coaches that gotten fired. We've
Mm-hmm.
seen like a spark
Right.
from that new hire. I don't believe that he has enough time to put things together because they played on Saturday. It gets announced today that on Sunday that Stan Drayton is out as coach. Now Everett Withers is having to take over. Now he's got to kind of start getting fast tracked into a game plan,
Right.
because they're going to have to travel essentially on Thursday. They can't fly up on Friday. So this week is short. So I don't know that he necessarily can put in many wrinkles, but then again, I don't know that this team is capable of many wrinkles.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll talk about it a little bit later on. There certainly has been this kind of bounce back when you see a coach get fired. It seems like all of a sudden the players are maybe more engaged, or they try harder. They're trying to, rally for something, but it's going to be really, really tough at this short week for him to be able to do anything other than just, try to get the best execution out of his team that he possibly can.
As you mentioned, they beat FAU in overtime.
Yep.
18-15. Yes, everybody, that was the score.
Yeah.
18-15. Temple put up 348 yards total offense, which ends up like really bringing up a lot of their averages. I say that because let's go into talking about Temple's offense. It's ranked 124th in the nation out of 134 at 307.1 yards per game. They are at 306.5 yards in conference play, which ranks them 14th out of 14th in AAC play.
Which, again, explains why they just fired their head coach.
Right. The rush offense is also 124th in the nation with 96.6 yards per game. It was much lower before the FAU game because they rushed for 134 yards. They were putting up about 60 yards per game. Guys, we've talked about how bad UTSA's rush offense is. It really hasn't been Temple bad, but I feel like we talk about it like it's Temple bad. Like Temple's offense really struggles. Their pass offense is a little better. It ranks 84th with 210.5 yards per game. It's about 10.4 yards per completion. This is not necessarily an offense that it's really, you talked about the pendulum just a while ago. We're swinging the pendulum to really bad.
Mm-hmm.
We were worried about North Texas and how they had the quick strike offense and, how they can really put a lot of pressure on UTSA's defense with, essentially their passing game. I'm not trying to downplay how bad Temple's offense is because I don't know where Temple can really take advantage of this UTSA team.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically the defense because of some of the stats that I've seen. And then I'm watching them play. You're right. This is why they fired Stan Drayton.
Right.
He's a former running backs coach that really doesn't have a good rushing game. His passing game really isn't there. They rank 125th in turnovers lost. They're scoring 19.1 points per game, which is 122nd in the nation. I mean, look, guys, it's really a bad offense. And to see some of the things coming out of the Temple Owls fans, I mean, they'd been done with Stan Drayton for a while.
Right.
Their key players start out with quarterback Evan Simon. He is a Rutgers transfer. He's passed for 1,545 yards. He's completing at about a 61% completion rate, which to me is impressive. I'll tell you why in a second. 13 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. The reason I was saying that 61% was impressive, some of his options to catch the ball are not very good receivers.
Right.
And without very much of a non-existent offensive line, I mean, if he's got time, he really nails throws between 10 and 19 yards down the field. But outside of that, he struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason he struggles is because this offensive line doesn't really give him a lot of time. And the rushing game, as we've already talked about, doesn't really give him much of a threat. So, man, Evan's got to do what he can to just put something together. They are led. Well, I won't say they're led. It's mostly like their feature back I think they want to make is this quicker running back, a junior JUCO transfer in running back Therese Worthy. He's rushed for 413 yards. He rushes for about 39.5 yards per game, rushed for 4 touchdowns. He's got 13 catches for 46 yards. It's
Yeah.
you see the story I'm putting here. Antoine Littleton is a redshirt junior. He's a transfer from Maryland. He's rushed the ball for 251 yards. He's rushed it for about 24.1 yards per game. His only touchdown came through the air. He's got 14 catches for 132 yards. Wide receiver wise, there's two guys that I want to point out here. Their top threat is Dante Wright. He's a redshirt senior, transfer from Colorado State. He's caught 56 passes for 664 yards and 4 touchdowns. He caught about 14 passes against FAU. Like, he is it.
Right.
I say that because their other wide receiver is Ashton Allen. He's a grad transfer. This is his first year of playing college football. He's previously a sprinter running the 400 at USC.
So we know he's fast.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. Like, no, he's quick. He'll get some end arounds, but it's not a very good blocking team. So
Right.
you get stuck there, right? Stuck in the mud. He did play in high school. So it's not like he's never played football before. He has. It's just way back in high school. So his one last year of eligibility, he decided to spend it with Stan Drayton in Philly. He's got 16 catches for 250 yards, 2 touchdowns. Just a poor blocking team, as I said. The pass blocking isn't too bad. And I'm kind of stretching it a little bit. They started getting some injuries during the Tulane game. That I did watch, and Tulane just kind of wore them down a little bit.
Right.
They just eventually took the spirit out of Temple. Not that I think there was a lot of spirit there, but they took it out of there. Let's go on to our defense. The Temple defense is ranked 102nd in the nation. They allow 404.5 yards per game. Their rush defense is 126th in the nation, allowing 214.5 yards per game. They allow 245 in conference, which gets them to 12th in conference. Their pass defense is actually statistically good. It's 31st in the nation, allowing 190 yards per game. Here's the deal. The reason that they don't allow many passing yards is because everybody's running all over them.
Right.
Nobody feels the need to ever have to pass against this Temple defense. H-Oves, guess who just took over for Stan Drayton? Everett Withers, the defensive coordinator. Everett Withers is not going to be around very long.
No, I mean, every stop that Everett Withers had as a head coach was like 2 seasons anyway. So I don't expect that he's going to be the guy that takes over long term now.
Yeah, and they have some nice players. We'll talk about the linebackers here in a second, but they're 124th in the nation in sacks with 13. 6 are in conference, which ranks 13th in conference.
I think the big thing that stood out to me was that they were allowing 35 points per game, and you just said Temple's offense was scoring about 19 points per game, so kind of tells you the story right there.
Absolutely. I don't know that it's necessarily all talent. I think there is some talent here. I also don't, but I do think that it wasn't coached very well, and I think it started with Stan Drayton, which is why we started the way we did with the preview. Some key players, I would say, top 2 tacklers are their linebackers, and they are good. DJ Woodbury, senior linebacker, and Taekwon King, redshirt junior. King leads the team with 88 tackles, and he's tied with 3 sacks and 6 quarterback hurries. DJ Woodbury leads the team with 54 solo tackles. King, I said, was tied with the sacks and the quarterback hurries with defensive end Dwan Black. He is himself forced 2 fumbles, and he has 16 solo tackles. He's kind of undersized for a 3.35 defensive end, but they do kind of lean on these 3 players to lead that defense and get him out of situations. But as we talked about in the rush defense, like it's tough. I mean, that defensive line isn't very good outside of Black, and again, like I said, he's undersized. You also have linebacker Trey Thomas. He's a nice linebacker that kind of complements Woodbury and King. He kind of comes in for them at times, substitutes out. Sometimes all 3 of them are in. It just depends on how they decide to line up. I'm not trying to say that this Temple team can't play well. Sure, anybody can rise up at some point. But I think, if anything, there is a strength, and that strength lies on the special teams.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they've got a great kicker in Maddox Trujillo. He's a senior. He was a transfer from Austin P. His field goal percentage right now is 72%, which might not sound really impressive, but most of his missed field goals are over 50 yards. This kid has a long of 64. So you see Stan putting him in situations where it's like, if it's anything under 65 yards and they don't think that they're going to make a fourth down, they're going to put their kicker out there and then just let him try, because chances are this kid's going to make it. And if he's doing that in the elements, he's going to be pretty impressive in the Alamo Dome, right?
He has the longest kick at Lincoln Financial Field, which also is the home of the Philadelphia Eagles.
Right.
That tells you how good this guy is. And watching him kick, he, I think, will be at least looked at very much by the NFL, because of the fact that NFL now, if you're not kicking at least 50 yards consistently, nobody wants you. So him kicking a 64-yarder, I think if it doesn't get him a look, then I'm going to be surprised that
and it's not his only field goal over 60 yards. He has, I think, a 60 and a 64. So, he's been, like I said, he's missed 3 field goals over 50, but he's taken a number of them. So he really is very good. And like you said, he's very impressive in the elements. I think we're likely going to see a very long field goal or 2 or 3 from him, in this game this week.
Look, I look forward to it if he does. I mean, I know it's Temple, but I would love to see that kid kick a long field goal there in the Alamo Dome. I think it'd be a really cool thing to see.
They also have a pretty good punter, Dante Adden. He's a sophomore, Australian. Surprise, surprise, right? He averages about 40 yards. He does have a long of 58 yards and a touchback. So, he's done, a pretty good job punting. So I think he's got a lot of experience punting, though, unfortunately, from this team. I would expect that we are going to see their special teams quite a bit.
Yeah, and to your point, I think the fact that he averages 40 yards a punt, I think it goes down because of the fact that he has to punt so much.
Right.
It has to have worn on him that he's got to do all that. All right, let's get to the keys to victory. On offense, attack the middle of Temple's defense with the run and pass. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I saw Tulane consistently running between the tackles against this Temple defense, and they had success. I understand that UTSA has a problem with running the ball and that Tulane is in a different sphere than UTSA as a football team. But taking a page out of that book, I don't know that there's a lot that you couldn't do, much like you did against UNT. So I think that there's going to be opportunities, and I think if they attack this defense the same way that they did against North Texas, or at least similarly, there's no way Temple can stay up. On defense, I'm just going to say it, take away Dante Wright. Dante he actually does a really good job of getting open. And I think the way our secondary has been playing, without really any other threats, and I mean, if you want to, I guess you can let some of those guys run open, but they don't really separate well anyway. Dante Wright, just slow him down a bit, and I think you're going to see this Temple offense really come grinding to a halt. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and go to our Hail Mary predictions, which are way too early.
I would say my only call out again for this UTSA team is that it is surprising how many teams play extremely well the week after their coach is fired. So we need to take this team seriously, despite the record, despite all of the stats. With this game being senior day, with bowl eligibility being in the balance, I expect that UTSA is going to come out and they're going to be focused, and we'll see the home team UTSA play that has a great record in the Dome. Even with all of our injuries, we're bigger, faster, stronger, more experienced, better coached than Temple. This game can easily be another record-setting game and a blowout similar to what we saw last year against South Florida. Give me UTSA 45, Temple 20.
All right. This is a very bad Temple team, and it takes them just so much effort to move and score the ball. As long as UTSA is focused like they have been, it's hard to bet against UTSA. And to me, it's going to be definitely a fun blowout win to send off the seniors, much like you said with South Florida. I'm not going to mince any more words. UTSA is going to demolish a listless, undermanned Temple team. Give me UTSA 52-14 over Temple.
All right, before we go, let's talk about some of the other scores from the American Conference this weekend. Well, the conference championship is now set. We know Army will be playing Tulane.
Nice.
Tulane shut out Navy 35-0. Not exactly what I was expecting from that game.
I'm not sure that Blake Horvath actually played in that game. I thought there was a different quarterback, but regardless, Tulane looks so well coached, and it looks like they're just going to overwhelm any team. I don't know how Army is going to fare against Tulane right now, but I'm going to venture a mild guess that Tulane's going to overwhelm Army and claim the AAC. And hopefully they do, because John Summerall is a really good coach. I've gushed about him before. I think we've got Jeff Monken as the coach for Army. I think he's a very good coach too, but Summerall is just in a different league than, I would say, every single AAC coach.
Well, if Army does end up losing to Notre Dame this week, like people expect them to, I think they're a 16-point underdog or something like that, and then UTSA shocks the world and beats Army, I mean, they could be going into this game with Tulane, just feeling very defeated.
Fair enough.
Probably not going to happen, but I'm just trying to talk it into existence.
Go for it.
East Carolina earned bowl eligibility with their win over Tulsa, 38-31.
They did what we couldn't do in Tulsa.
They did. And the fact that East Carolina is sitting here talking about the fact that they're going to go to a bowl and we're still questioning whether we're going to make it is just one of the quandaries of the season. I don't know what else to say.
It's just missed opportunities.
Yeah.
Again, we'll talk about it at some point when we do our review, but just so many missed opportunities that if you take care of business, this could have been us going to Army potentially for the bid against Tulane, right?
Yeah.
So I saw East Carolina play, and I'll be honest with you, they are playing better without Mike Houston. They look
without Mike
much
Houston
better.
and Jake Garcia. I mean, Caton Hauser, looks really good as their quarterback.
Yeah, and that's just to say, not that he's like great,
Yeah.
but he's looks much more competent than Jay Garcia did at the time.
We already mentioned this, but Temple did beat FAU with a walk-off field goal in overtime, 18-15. One of the fun little things that the announcer said during the game was, these are two teams that don't play for NIL. They play for the love of the game.
Is that going to be the new, that's what they're going to call their game now? The For the Love of the Game Bowl.
I guess. But, I mean, while you could certainly make that argument about Temple, especially since Stan Drayton had made those comments about NIL right before the game, I don't know that you can say the same about FAU. I think FAU is probably doing all right when it comes to NIL, but I just thought it was an odd little comment that the announcer made and worth repeating.
What a drop-off for Tom Herman, though.
I know.
We would have thought that he was turning it around this season and putting himself in a much better position to succeed there, and it's not. So it's going to get interesting to see how he continues to restructure that FAU team, and I'm still confused. And this FAU team was supposed to be in a really good spot, and they're just not.
He's got to find himself a quarterback one of these seasons.
Yeah.
South Florida beat Charlotte 59-24. Talking about quarterbacks, it felt like for a moment there that Charlotte had found their quarterback with Purdy, but apparently not.
He's fine. I'm not going to say that he's one of the best, but I think your problem starts at the top, and that's Biff Poggi, right? That's your problem. And he was asked about the fact that, where was he rating himself based on the results this season? And he's like, oh, very poorly. It starts with me. Yeah, we know that.
So what are you going to do?
Yeah. So,
honestly, he's just lucky that he doesn't have to play UTSA this year, because apparently when teams either play us or shortly thereafter, they then fire their coach or they fire a coordinator. So
right.
Next year, though, we do play them. So if he makes it to next year,
Biff's probably going to be on the chopping block.
That's right. All right. Well, I think that about wraps it up for us. Thanks for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves.
And I'm Toves.
We'll be back later this week with an update on UTSA basketball.
Birds up.